did the Marlins go overboard in that? They obviously improved their strikeout rate. They went and got, one of the hardest, I think the hardest guy to strike out last year among qualified hitters in Luis Arraez. They signed Zon Segura, who can make contact with any breaking ball that he wants to, and they now boast a lineup that has a mix, I think, of making contact and making contact for power. Did they do enough? Do you see a lineup here that can produce even an above average season, an above 500 team?
Yeah, I think, like you said, they made a lot of improvements because last year the lineup wasn't good, and now they have a lot of guys who are much better in contact to bat to ball ratio. They're going to hope to kind of lower those strikeouts. My issue with the Marlins is they seem to be in the wrong division, right? If they were in another division, and even in the NL East, they feel it to me like potentially a pesky team that kind of hangs around and gives these teams, the Mets, the Braves, the Phillies, a little more trouble than you would otherwise think. I think Kim Ng did a great job of kind of retooling this roster. The biggest question for me for this team, outside of what I said earlier, Jazz Chisholm, because I think he is the Ronald Acuna, right? He is the guy who is capable of taking this team to another
The
level.
star that what is it? The
Yes,
straw that stirs the drink.
correct, right? He's stirring and stirring, and he's he can do it all. So I think he's really important. I'm curious what Skip Schumacher brings there. We've got a first time manager, a guy who I think a lot of people were wondering down in Miami if they were going to hire a Latin guy or somebody who at least had a little bit more presence in an area where Spanish is pretty much the predominant language down there. I'm in Miami currently, so
Right.
here. I'm really curious though because Schumacher obviously comes from the Cardinals and also was with St. Louis and was with San Diego coaching. So he's got a pedigree as a player. He's got some coaching background, and apparently, he just knocked everyone's socks off in the interview. He's a terrific interview. I've met him a little bit. I could see why people like him. He's very likable. But what kind of tone is he going to set, right? What is he going to be able to do? And we know that managers have less power than they used to, but they're still, especially with a team like the Marlins that has been down and out for quite some time, there's still an important facet there. What is he going to be able to bring to this team, right? Like, what is he going to be able to do as a manager for them? Because this is a team still searching for their identity. I mean, they are Jazz Chisholm's team when he's on the field. He's really had trouble staying healthy. So I would like to know, or I'm curious to see how this goes with Skip Schumacher, what he can do for this team, because they're on the up and up. I think the Marlins are kind of trending upward. They're not at the peak yet, but they're kind of headed in the right direction. But with that being said, this could all unravel very quickly in a division where, as we mentioned, 3 teams could legitimately win the World Series coming out of this division. So I think they've improved. I think they still, though, are probably etched into 4th place, barring some kind of collapse from one of those other 3 teams.
Yeah, I think you're right to point out Skip Schumacher here, because I think as much as Kim Ng has improved this roster, I find it fits together strangely. And so Skip Schumacher's going to have a lot of decisions to make. I think this is a sort of a high decision rate roster, if that makes any sense.
I
Because,
like that.
he's got Garrett Cooper and Yuli Gurriel, who both bat from the same side and play first base.
Yeah.
Right. So right there, that's a big roster decision. Do you go with the veteran? They're both kind of veterans, but do you go with the veteran who's coming off a bad year that maybe have 1 foot out of baseball? Or do you go with the guy who's been, playing first base in Miami for so far? You have like maybe 4 or 5 second basemen on this roster. It's really bizarre, kind of. Segura's played second base for a long time. Joey Wendell's best position is second base. Luis Arraez was actually kind of being moved off of second base in Minnesota, but he's probably a second baseman. John Birdie is probably the backup to the backup shortstop, but he's a second baseman. Jazz Chisholm Jr., second baseman in center field. So, teams don't normally stock up on second baseman, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on Skip to kind of put together the best defensive lineup he can put together with so many second basemen. Jose Iglesias is in town now, and I think that's going to give him a lot of flexibility to maybe do some late game replacement, where
Yeah.
you get a lead, you've got a great starting staff, you've got a great an okay bullpen that added AJ Puck. It's gotten better. And so if you get a lead, maybe you put Iglesias in and you can move Wendell all over. You can move Arias to some different places. And so maybe you can have an all defensive lineup in late in games where you kind of you figure it out defensively. But at the beginning of games, Skip's got to put that lineup together, and he's going to have choices where he goes, do I go with a power with Jesus Sanchez? Or do I go with a little bit more, bat to ball with somebody else? Does Brian De La Cruz break camp with the team, or just because he has an option, he goes back down? When do you pull the plug on Avisail Garcia and Jorge Soler if they don't really kind of rebound to where they've been in the past? Those are a lot of decisions to make. It's nice for him to basically pencil in a good starter, a good to great starting pitcher every night, and that's going to be a thing that will keep if the Marlins do well, it's because those starting pitchers are great and some of the hitters step forward. Jesus Sanchez, Brian De La Cruz, Jazz Chisholm has that MVP type year that he can have, and Skip makes that defense work. Is there and then what's the bad story? Well, the bad story seems pretty obvious. We've kind of been playing that one out, haven't we? What's the bad story for the Marlins?
I mean, it's the young pitching not being able to take that step forward, right? It's kind of them becoming the Detroit Tigers are a great example. I talked about this last week. They had all this young pitching. The problem with young pitching is it's really tough to predict, and you have to be able to take your lumps and get better. You have to make these adjustments. And as you mentioned, the rotation is really good. Honestly, like I can't believe Trevor Rogers is only 25. I feel like we've been talking about that guy for a while.
You're talking about the up and down nature of young pitching. Trevor Rogers had like a 5 ERA last year.
Exactly. But then 2 years ago was terrific. So you're like kind of just like wondering what's going on with a lot of these guys. They have, I think it's a 19-year-old. I think it's Yuri Perez. They have like some other 19-year-old.
Oh yeah, he's like 6'8" or something, 6'9".
Yeah, so like they keep churning out.
Yeah.
They keep turning out this ridiculous stuff. And maybe Johnny Cueto, maybe having that veteran there will help some of these younger guys, right? Like that's a signing that you're like, okay, maybe he does more in the clubhouse than he actually does on the field. I kind of like the idea of having that veteran, to people kind of help like these guys along.
Young pitchers do like him, yeah.
Right. So maybe that really helps kind of keep them in line. But to me, the Marlins are going to live and die by their rotation, because if those guys don't get it done, they're very quickly going to be buried 5-6-0. And their lineup is good, but good luck coming back against the Braves lineup and the Mets and the Philly, right? Like when you're already in that kind of a hole, I think the only way they're going to be able to win these games and kind of overperform is if their rotation keeps them in it and gives the lineup a chance to get that big hit at the end, right? Their bullpen is fine. It's nothing to write home about. But as you said, it's that rotation that every night they should be able, theoretically on paper, to compete because of that pitching.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I saw it slightly differently, where I was like, well, the starting pitching is what's going to keep them in it. If there's a bad story for this Marlins team is that they don't score runs, but if there's a really bad story for the Marlins, the starting pitching is not there also, right? So I can see what you're saying. I think it's pretty much it's Jazz that has to step forward, but I think also Jesus Sanchez and Brian De La Cruz, there's outside pressure on them to step forward, because they've traded away JJ Bleday. They haven't really developed someone in-house other than Jazz that has this offensive ability. And so this lineup just needs to get better where, Brian De La Cruz or Jesus Sanchez are penciled in. Obviously, Garcia has to get back to where he was. Soler, when he was healthy last year, still hit bombs. He's not the greatest hitter in the world, but he just hits bombs. It's an interesting way that this team was fashioned, though, because I thought that park was really pitcher friendly, and it is when it comes to home runs, but it is not overall. It is in fact a sort of middle of the pack park when it comes to runs. And so maybe Kim Ng saw that and said, hey, we've been striking out and trying to hit homers in a park that doesn't like that. We need to fit our offense better to our park, and that's going to be more singles and doubles. So I love Segura as a player, so it could really work out. It's just weird to not have a shortstop that, I think every team that doesn't have a young shortstop other than the Braves is freaking out about it.